So, this morning, Jungian dream interpretation. I hope you've all come armed with a dream yourselves. And in case you suddenly look puzzled and didn't read the small print, I'm going to try a bit of an experiment when I'm going to talk you through a dream that I hope you have bought later on. It's a bit difficult with so many people, but I think the idea is that you'll be working on it yourselves, and of course dreams tell us an enormous amount about the person and are very private and revealing. So what I don't want to do is ask one person to bring out their dream and we have it all in front of you. So it'll be really your own work, but hopefully be able to build on what I've talked about in the talk. So before I get there, I'm going to talk a little bit about the ancients' view of dreams and dreaming. I'm also going to talk about a bit about neuroscience, because I want to give you a sort of crash course in the unconscious. There'll also be a bit of a crash course on Jungian psychology, which Jung's view of dreams was very much central to how he thinks about the Jungian psyche. And I'm going to be illustrating this with Jung's own dreams, 3 of Jung's own dreams. So I hope that's all going to hang together. Okay, to start with the ancients' view of dreams. We know a little... Up? More? Okay, thank you. We know about Is that okay? No? How's that? Okay, sorry. We know about the ancients, the Egyptian view of dreams through this papyrus, which was found off the Valley of Kings, which has an interpretation of 108 dreams. But back in those days, they thought dreams had a fixed meaning. So if you dreamt of various things, they had one meaning only. So this is the kind of thing that papyrus says. If you dreamt of a deep well, it meant you would be going to prison. If you dreamt of a shining moon, it would be forgiveness. If you were dead, it was a good omen, you'd have a long life. If you dreamt of a face in the mirror, it meant it'd be a new life. And of course, we can sort of understand how these things come about, and I'll be talking about dream symbolism and why they may come, but it's a little bit random, but also very much related to the particular culture of the time. So the last one, if you're making love to your wife in daylight, it's a bad omen. Your God will find out your misdeeds. So, a large part of the dreams back then were thought about the dream being a message from God, or a message from an external source, a sort of revelation. I mean, of course, the famous dream from back then is Pharaoh's dream of the 7 cows being eaten up by the 7 fat cows being eaten up by the 7 thin cows, interpreted by Joseph. Pharaoh took this very seriously, and he put aside the grain from 7 years of bumper harvests, and later on, when the 7 lean years came, he was all prepared to go. And his dream interpreter became his sort of chief vizier and did very well out of it. Jung talked about big archetypal dreams like this, dreams which often have a sort of a numinous feel, and maybe you yourselves have had such a dream. Often these dreams can sort of change the direction of your life, but they really stay with you. So we might be touching on some of those archetypal big dreams a bit. But there's a question that I'll be kind of running for a little while, which is, do dreams tell the future? So somebody who thought about this a long time ago was Aristotle. He said that, he said 2 main things, very nice short papers he wrote on dreams. The first one is that dreams don't have divine agency. They're not a message from God. His reason, ordinary people have dreams, and even the lower animals have dreams. So obviously God wouldn't be speaking to us. His other thought, he recognized that dreams don't always come true. So therefore he thought they weren't therefore prophetic. But what he did think was that they really tune in very well to what's going on in our bodies, and this is a very modern view, this, and therefore they might be very helpful to diagnose bodily illnesses. So that's Aristotle. Two fellows from the 2nd century, Macrobius and Artemidorus, they thought in order to get over this issue of whether dreams were prophetic, they divided them into two. Some relate to the past and the present, and some relate to the future. So a big leap now from the past to Freud. And his monumental book, The Interpretation of Dreams, brought out at the turn of the century. In later years, he came to consider this book really his most important one, because it's not only a view of how to interpret dreams, but it's a view he introduces the Oedipus complex, repression, his idea of primary and secondary processes, and his understanding of the unconscious. And I'll be talking about that in a minute, his view of condensation, displacement, timelessness, absence of mutual contradiction, and replacement of internal by external reality. So one of the dreams he gives in the interpretation of dreams is, this is from an adult patient of his. She remembered that as a child she'd had this dream, that all her brothers and sisters and cousins who had been romping in the field grew wings and flew away. Now for for Freud, this was a view of the disguise that dreams employ. So he saw the essential element of the dream is there's a latent content and a manifest content. The manifest content was the dream of the children romping and flying away, but he thought this was disguising a latent content, which was her hidden desire. And the hidden desire was that her brothers and sisters, he felt, she wished them to grow wings, to become angels, to be dead. This was her death wish for her older siblings. So this was Freud's view of so it was the repressed wish, the wish fulfillment of this young girl, and he felt that dreams were about wish fulfillment, and that their view really was about you dreamt because you were trying to preserve sleep so that you could repress these hidden wishes. And it was this book of Freud's that actually introduced Jung to Freud. He was very enthusiastic about it, and he wrote to Freud saying that he thought he had proof of repression, and he was doing at the time his work on word association and the complex, which is a term he introduced. So they got together and collaborated, as you almost certainly know, for over a decade, very successfully. And Jung took on the view of dreams as even more important than Freud, because in Freudian theory, whilst it's there in the background, it sort of doesn't take the central role it does for Jung. So now we come to Jung's views. A bit of a long quote, but one worth looking at and unpacking. Dreams are impartial, spontaneous products of the unconscious psyche, outside of the control of the will. They are pure nature. They show us the unvarnished, natural truth, and are therefore fitted, as nothing else is, to give us back an attitude that accords with our basic human nature when our consciousness had strayed too far from its foundations and run into an impasse. So there's a lot in that sentence, which I'll just unpack for you. So one of the things he's doing in that statement is he's disagreeing with Freud. Dreams aren't disguised, he says. They show us the unvarnished natural truth. Why is it then that they can be so bizarre and so difficult to understand? And the answer for him is the nature of symbols and their rich meaning. And it's precisely that I'm going to be concentrating on this morning, looking at the many layers of meaning and the many layers of significance that a symbol can hold. And often you can go on working on a dream throughout your whole life. And I'll be talking about the different ways we can look at dreams and the ways we can really mine the significance of dreams and get to the different levels on which they work. The other thing he thought about dreams was that they were offered a compensation. He didn't say this every time, but this was his kind of primary view. And It was when quote, that bit of quote again, when we've strayed too far from our foundations. So it's when the dream is a message from the unconscious trying to tell you what you don't know already. A dream is always trying to tell you something you don't know. Marie-Louise von Franz said, dreams don't waste much spit telling us what we know already. So the dream, maybe consciously we think, have one view, but the dream is trying to tell us something we need to know, that when our psyche's got out of balance. And the other thing about Jung's very different view to Freud's was he thought the unconscious was essentially constructive, whereas Freud sometimes, early on particularly, saw the unconscious as the dustbin of the psyche, simply the place where things were repressed. Things changed as he developed his theory of ego, id and superego. You know, he very much recognized that these were the id needed to be integrated and was a source of richness. But for Jung, he takes it much further than that, and he sees the unconscious and what he came to call the self as holding the wisdom of the psyche. And for him, if you like, the essence of Jungian psychology is that if we can only learn to listen to the unconscious, to the self, to what it's trying to tell us, then that is the source of wisdom, that's the greatest source of wisdom that we can hear. So in order to think about the self, briefly look at the neuroscience of dreams to think about how the unconscious works and how that fits with Jung's views and Freud's views to some extent. So, as you may well know, Azarinsky was studying the science of dreaming, and he noticed that dreams mostly occurred in REM sleep. And with Kleitman in 1953, he suggested that it was this period of sleep that this period of sleeping when we have REM, rapid eye movement phase, that that dreams occur. And then a French researcher, Michael Jouvet, in 1962, was working on cats, and he discovered that by removing the pons, a deep part of our brain stem that is in humans and all mammals, that cats, the REM sleep was prevented. So Hobson and McAuley had a theory which they called the activation synthesis theory. So dreams, they said, are activated by the firing of the primitive part of the brain, the pons. And this triggers the brain to synthesize these meaningless, randomless images into some kind of narrative. So this was a view that was very much taken up early on by the press, not so much in the psychology field, and Freud's view of the significance of dreams was still held sway there, but this was a sort of a science rebuff to that. Hobson says, if consciousness is in the forebrain, we can completely eliminate any possible contribution of ideas to dreaming. This was his view. But through various challenges I'm just going to describe in a minute, he has changed his views over time. And he's had to recognize that the lower brain functions are associated with a mood, emotion, and feeling in particular. So his view then went on to say that actually we can ignore the content, but it's the bizarreness is due to the undisguised emotional content of the dream. And I think this also reflects the way our understanding of ourselves has changed. We used to think of ourselves as very cognitive beings, but I think now we very much recognize the centrality of affect, of emotion. And that this, in a way, I mean, I don't know if you've ever read Damasio's excellent book, The Feeling of What Happens, where he describes how cognition, thinking, follows directly from our emotions, that it's built out of and on top of emotion. But the one thing I want to pick up on is Hobson also thinks that the bizarre nature of dreams is due to the sleeping mind making too many associations. Dreaming, he says, is a hyper-associative state. And whilst I disagree with him on many things, that I completely agree with him, and I think that is the key to being be able to understand symbols and symbolization. So, this is Mark Soames. He's a South African Freudian neuroscientist, and he pointed out that dreaming doesn't just occur during REM sleep. There are actually three types of dreams. There is what's called sleep onset dreams, which are those dreams we get just as we're drifting off. Last weekend, I spent the weekend digging in the garden, and just as I was going to sleep, I found myself going like this kind of strange movement, which is precisely what was left over in my body. And those sleep onset dreams often are very much somatically led. Then there's REM sleep. If you wake someone in REM sleep, 90 to 95% of the time, they will describe dreams of a bizarre nature, the bizarre nature that we kind of famously think of in relation to dreams. But however, if you wake people in non-REM sleep, you find that 5 to 10% they still talk and will describe bizarre dreams. But if you ask them what was going on, was any thinking going on, 50% of the time they will tell you, yes, there was something going on, but they'll describe it not in that bizarre way. They will describe it in terms of something worrying. I was thinking about an exam, or I was thinking about a difficulty at work. It's a sort of really emotionally based kind of experience. And actually, as the night goes on, we have what's called non-REM 2 dreams, where they're sort of more like the REM type dreams, and we get more of the kind of typical bizarre nature dreams. So he felt that was one of the main critiques of that Hobson McAuley's activation synthesis model. And further than that, he discovered that destroying the pons doesn't stop dreaming in humans. And of course, they didn't do this experiment. This was people who had some kind of brain damage. In one person only was that successful. However, they did find, people who'd had brain damage, that there were 3 times when dreaming was stopped. Firstly, when the dopamine pathway, so between the 2 hemispheres, had been severed. And this he related to the goal-seeking behavior of human beings. So he very much felt this supported the Freudian view of wish fulfillment, but you could also see that goal-seeking behavior is very much about our interest in the world and what we do, so it sort of is a bit broader than that. Also, when there was damage to the right parietal lobe, so that's the visuospatial area of the brain dealing with perception and memory. But most significantly, he found that when the damage to the occipitotemporal parietal junction, and this is the part of the brain which takes our everyday experience and relates it to abstract thinking, so it generalizes. And this is very much what dreams are doing at night. They're generalizing from our particular experience. And so Soames said dreams and the higher function of the brain are therefore essential for dreaming. So the purpose of dreaming, if I just sort of, it's there for you to read, but it's about the affective reorganization of memory. It's about taking those experiences that we have every day, seeing how they fit in with how we feel about ourselves, what's going on about the particular relationships we've had, all that experience we've had during the day. Too much to deal with consciously. The dream reorganizes that. And over time, the dreams construct the powerful subconscious or preconscious affective psychological patterns that make us the people we are. And that's Jack Panksepp, who is died recently, but a brilliant neuroscientist. Hobson also has come to recognize that dreaming helps us develop a secure sense of agency as the I integrates the individual's different experiences and sense of self. So that's the modern neuroscientific view, and as you'll see, as you'll hear now, very much coheres with Jung's view. So I'd like to think about signs, symbols, and the unconscious and how the unconscious works. Another quote from Jung: dreams are a spontaneous self-portrayal in symbolic form of the actual situation in the unconscious. But what's a symbol? So here are 4 images, symbols. I'd like you to think to yourself for a moment what they symbolize to you. You might even like to just quickly check out with the person sitting next to you to see what they make of them as well. But just, do you want to take 2 minutes to do that? See if you cohere or see where the differences are. Okay, I don't know if you want to shout out a few things or that takes you back to school too much. This is the weekend in university after all. But the tree, what do you get for the tree? Life. Peace. Growth. Earth and sky. And it's a home for lots of animals. Right, thank you. Okay, lovely, thank you. The crocodile? Danger. Power, danger. Advertising. The baby? Innocence. I missed that one. Yeah. And the dove? Oh yeah, I mean, unfortunately it's a bit spoilt, the dove, isn't it? Because it's symbolically it's being used in that way. But okay, and you might ask yourself, why do these things symbolize that? Yeah, what is it about those things? Well, so to kind of dig a bit more deeply into that. So Freud thought that the unconscious worked in 5 ways. Condensation, displacement, timelessness, the absence of mutual contradiction, and replacement of external by internal reality. So if we take that dream of the siblings growing wings and flying away, we could say that things were sort of condensed there. So the various meanings were condensed into one place, and the wish to kill off had been displaced into them growing wings and flying away. There was a timelessness. The dreams have a timeless meaning that apply not just at one moment, but at future moments. And you know, someone can be alive and dead in the same dream, or at different times alive and dead. And really, it's about internal reality when it seems to be about external reality. I don't know if you've heard of a South American psychoanalyst called Matty Blanco, a brilliant man who worked a lot with maths, and he analysed Freud's view of dreams and said, actually it can be put really simply, what the unconscious does is it recognises the samenesses, the symmetry between one thing and another. So if we go back to those symbols we were looking at, we could say that the crocodile symbolises danger because it's got big teeth. Anything dangerous is going to be symbolised by that. A tree, growth, family, connections, you know, the roots. We're working on the connections and the similarities. And this picks up Hobson's view that dreaming is a hyper-associative state. The other way that Freud differed from Jung, or Jung differed from Freud rather, is that he felt Freud very much was interpreting his symbols in a particular way, towards sexuality particularly, an infantile sexuality, so that, you know, anything long and thin would be a penis, anything that contains stuff would be a vagina. But for Jung, a symbol has much more meaning like that, many layers of meaning. So he felt that a symbol was finding out the essence and the pattern of something. It points to more than just one reference. And the unconscious therefore works by finding out the samenesses and the links. And you can see why this is so important. So yes, you can see how this works for infants. It's really important that the infant can find out whether this person is similar or indeed the same as the warm mother I saw yesterday, whether they have the same friendly qualities. It really is essential to the way we can identify things in the world, begin to form representations. So this is the way the unconscious works from very early on in life. And yeah, I'd say that here, this is why the loss of the occipitotemporal parietal junction is fatal to dreaming, because you can't make that abstraction from the concrete reality to the abstract view of. So if you showed someone who'd had that part of the brain damage, you've showed them one of those pictures earlier of a baby, they would just say it's a baby. Okay, the other way to get into Jung's dream interpretation a bit more, and this is where the different levels come in. He interpreted dreams on 4 different levels: the objective, the subjective, the transference, and the archetypal levels. This might seem a bit clunky at first, but I hope you'll bear with it, because it really gives us the different ways we can think about dreams. Okay, so the objective level. On the objective level, a dream applies to things in the real world, either historically or currently. So we have a dream of driving too fast in a car and crashing. What does this mean? Is this a prophetic dream that means we're going to crash? Or if we can we treat it symbolically? Does it mean that in various ways we are driving too fast, we're taking risks, we're doing too much? There was a famous dream that Jung recounts a number of times of a fellow he met in a Zurich bar who said to him, "Hey Carl, are you still doing that ridiculous dream interpretation stuff? I had this dream. I was up walking on the mountains, you know how much I love that. I was walking higher and higher, I felt fantastic, and I got to the top of the mountain and I just carried on walking." And Jung said to him, "Next time you go mountain climbing, make sure you take 2 guides with you." And he said, "Oh, rubbish." But 3 months later, he was off climbing this mountain and he was seen to step out into thin air, apparently, just like he had in his dream. He fell, unfortunately taking his young climbing companion with him. So, very much that's the dream on the objective level. So, when we have a dream of driving too fast, should we drive more slowly? Perhaps indeed we should. Perhaps we should be also thinking more generally about how to take care about our what we're doing, in what ways we're driving too fast, in what ways we're not being careful, in what ways we're taking risks. Jung's interpretation of this mountain climbing dream is very peculiar because he just took it on the external level. He describes this man as very headstrong. Now, if you tell someone who's headstrong, don't do such and such, they're not very likely to listen to you. So, you know, perhaps that might account for it, but you could almost think that actually, if you listen to these dreams, the prophetic element of them wouldn't come about, because he would have stopped driving so fast, or he would have taken some more guides with him. So are dreams prophetic? Well, I'll give Jung the words on this one. And for him, it's about the perspective, the forward-looking purpose of the unconscious. So he says, "It would be wrong to call dreams prophetic because at bottom they are no more prophetic than a medical diagnosis or a weather forecast. They are merely an anticipatory combination of probabilities which may coincide with the actual behaviour of things, but need not necessarily agree in every detail. Only in the latter case can we speak of prophecy." So actually you might think that a medical diagnosis or a weather forecast is pretty prophetic. How does this work? Jung says it happens because that the prospective function of dreams is sometimes greatly superior to the combinations we can consciously foresee is not surprising, since a dream results from the fusion of subliminal elements and is thus a combination of all the perceptions, thoughts and feelings which consciousness has not registered because of their feeble accentuation. So, translation of that, our unconscious is picking up all this stuff all the time, it's kind of working on it all the time, much more than our little consciousness, which apparently can only deal with 5 things at any one time. The unconscious is working all these things, and it comes up with these answers. This is what holds the wisdom, if you like, this unconscious functioning, and he calls this, one element of it is the self. So the next level is the subjective level. This is very much associated with Jung. in this level where every object in the dream refers back to aspects of the dreamer themselves. So if you have a dream of being attacked by a violent stranger, yes, do take care when you go out. That's the objective level, but also perhaps this is a part of yourself, a violent part of yourself that you are strange to, that you haven't thought of before. Another kind of peculiarity of dreams, people do funny things. I married my sister. So there's a sort of a real charge to that. Well, perhaps it's, we'll be coming to the male and the female aspects of the personality in a little while, but perhaps it's a coming together of your kind of predominant male side with your feminine side, speaking as a man. Freud criticised Jung for saying that dreams are always like this. He didn't, in fact, do so, as it's clear, because he outlined the four, but he did put quite a lot of emphasis on the subjective level. The transference level is the relational level. For those of you who are therapists, very interesting to take your patient's dream as a commentary on what you're doing. So, if a person dreams of being attacked by a violent stranger, perhaps they found the last session quite attacking, something that they didn't expect from you. It was something they felt to be violent. So very much worth listening to on that level. So it's a real supervisory aspect there. And then the archetypal level. This relates to the archetypal level is the powerful and universal level and the typical level that maybe we all have in common, but also the primitive and early aspects of the dream symbols. So it's kind of the way I think about it is the archetypal level is the way it works. This is the way we think the world runs, is on the archetypal level. And sometimes dreams taken on this level are, as I said at the beginning, what's called big or archetypal dreams, which really feel like they're trying to tell someone something really important and have a sort of a numinous kind of otherworldly quality about them. When you look at the archetypal meaning of dreams, Jung called this amplification. I'll be giving you an example in a minute. So, one more thing. So my particular interest in dreams is that they tell us, in a way that nothing else can really, about our early patterns of behaviour. So our early patterns of behaviour that we think of now in terms of internal working models. This was Bowlby's term. This was the way our primary caregivers related with us, our internal working models. They became part of who we are. They become part of our personality, the way we react. They're implicit, so we don't do it on purpose. We are behaving in this way automatically. It's part of our procedural memory. And these patterns are very much picked up by dreams. And again, I'll be giving you some examples in a minute. But these patterns affect us on all the different levels, in our relationship with people in the real world, our relationships with ourselves, in our relationships to our therapist, to our main relations, and in the way we think the world works. So if we had a kind of a really strict parent, that's the way we think the world works. If we expect to be criticised, we expect things to occur in that way. And these patterns I put here apply on all the different levels. So in this way, dreams don't just have one meaning. They can have many meanings, many levels of meaning, and keep on unfolding. Famous example from the past, a rabbi from, I forget which century now, he had 24 dream interpreters, and they each gave him 24 different interpretations and predictions, and he said they were all right. So each dream interpretation can pick up some bit of the truth, which is why you can carry on discovering more and more over time from the same dream. Also worth recognizing that Jung was very selective about the way he applied this to his own dreams. And let me give you an example. So this is the first of Jung's dreams I'm going to look at with you. So this was a dream he had. He'd been traveling to America with Freud. They'd been lecturing over there. On the way out, Jung had been talking about these dead bodies that had been found in these peat bogs, and Freud had fainted. And Jung had noticed this. On the way back, Jung told Freud this dream that he'd just had. I was in a house I didn't know. I've condensed it a bit. It was my house with an upper story in Rococo style. Beneath that, there was a more basic red brick medieval ground floor. And then there was a cellar dating back to Roman times. And underneath that, there was a primitive cave with broken pottery, scattered bones, and 2 human skulls in it. Well, perhaps you can imagine the bit that Freud was interested in. He said, who are those 2 skulls? And he was very much thinking that Jung wanted to kill him off. This is his understanding of the Oedipal complex, that actually the son, Jung was the son, whilst Freud was the king. And so he says, who's that? Jung lied. He said, oh, I think it's my sister and my cousin. My wife and my cousin, I beg your pardon. Jung had a tendency to do that. Freud was also interested, you could say, on the objective level. He said, well, what does this apply in the world now? What's this about between you and me? What's going on for you that makes you think this like this? Jung, on the other hand, took this dream very differently. He looked on the subjective and the archetypal levels. The house, he said, this is a view of the psyche. And we can see that all these different levels there. So we have the upper levels of the house, we have our understanding of our consciousness, our proper ways of behaving. But as we dig down, we get to deeper and deeper levels of the psyche, until eventually at the bottom layer, we get to what he called the collective unconscious, where there's the wisdom of the previous generations are collected there in the collective unconscious. So he felt that actually the dream was telling me something about archetypal, about the way we are, and about psyche. Now actually, you can see that the dream operates on all those levels, because it was this very dream, and it was Jung's work on the psyche that led him to break from Freud. So perhaps it was very much one of the dreams and things that led him to kill off Freud, precisely as he said. And I mean, perhaps the other skull one might think of was Jung's own father, who, like Freud, had been very warm towards him and taken him on, kind of the special son, but Jung thought he'd outgrown this father, who was a pastor, and kind of rather disparaged him, and they parted ways. But as you will undoubtedly know, Jung and Freud's parting in 1913 was very much more traumatic for both of them. So I'd like to say a little bit about archetypal symbolism. This is when, in a dream, there are certain elements that particularly occurs when the person doesn't have any personal association. So what's really important in dream interpretation is to ask the person for their associations. And when we get to your dreams in a minute, that's the thing we'll be concentrating on, looking at your particular associations to all the elements in the dream. But sometimes the person doesn't have any, or sometimes there are particular themes in the dream, and we can look at those in an archetypal way, and Jung called this process amplification. So when you're looking at the archetypical elements of the dream, and often these turn up in kind of universal ways reflected in myths, fairy tales, stories, film, culture. They'll be different to every culture. So, somebody might, if you want to dream of a hero, it might well be kind of Luke Star Wars to a lad brought up in the 80s in the West, or something very different to someone brought up elsewhere. But what's particularly helpful in looking at dreams is there are certain archetypal things that I find very helpful when someone brings a dream to start to orientate myself to what they're saying about themselves. And these are the parts of the personality as described by Jung. So these are the self, the persona, the anima, the animus, etc. So let me go through those. So Jung felt that the house was very much talking about the personality itself. What kind of house are you in? People will often bring a dream where they suddenly discover they've got 4 new rooms, or a lot more space, or that the house that they have is suddenly become grand, or suddenly got a hole in the roof, or suddenly the walls are falling down. You know, you sort of get the symbolism of what that's going to mean. So the house, as a starting point, is perhaps the personality. And what part of the house are we looking at? So if we're up in the attic, maybe it's the thinking area. It's very much to do with someone who's getting stuck in their head, perhaps. What's going on in the attic? You'd look at that. The next thing is in the bedroom. This is the most intimate area, perhaps to do with sex or sexuality. Another element would be the kitchen. Food, what's going on, a place where nurturing is being received, something good is being received, who's doing the cooking. And then down in the basement, we've got the unconscious, the things perhaps we don't want to know about, the things we don't know about so well, the place where it's sort of dark and unheard of. And these are very much starting places. So but you'd also be asking the person what their particular associations are to this house. Why this house? Is it one that's familiar to you? Is it something that's happened in that particular place? The next thing is the persona. So often people are dreaming of getting around from A to B. Are they in a car? Are they in a bike? Are they in a plane? What's happening? What kind of car is it? You know, is it looking? Are you looking very flash? Are you looking a bit too flash? Have you lost your car in the car park? You're not sure how to get around at that particular time. Are you driving in the middle of the road? Has it suddenly become very dangerous? What are you doing? What are you doing in your personality that's being reflected in that way? You know, a bike. I mean, obviously, if you use a bike as your main means of transport, then perhaps that reflects that. But perhaps you know, a more exposed way of getting around. Perhaps you're feeling more exposed at the present time. A train. I had one person who's given me permission to talk about her dreams. She was all the time dreaming about being on a train, going on certain journeys, and was very afraid of getting involved in an intimate relationship. I think because, as reflected by the train, you get on and then someone else is taking you somewhere. And when she started suddenly dreaming about driving a car, she could drive perfectly well, it was as if she'd discovered her ability to take control of things, and within a couple of weeks of this dream, she had started an intimate relationship. So, you know, a train, perhaps, you know, it's a limited way, you're fixed, you've got to go someone else's way. That, you know, just one association to it. I mentioned the anima and the animus earlier. So Jung's early view of the anima and animus was that a man has an anima within him. This was back in the 1920s where kind of that gender stereotyping was going on, and a woman has an animus, which is the male part. So the man's anima is the female part, the contrasexual part of one's personality. One of the developments of Jungian psychology, thankfully, has been to recognize that we each have male and female parts, and they're in constant dynamic interchange with each other. And but looking at those, the gender of certain figures in the dream, may be very much looking at those parts of yourself. So this is taking it on the subjective level, taking about parts of yourself. And then the shadow. This is the undeveloped aspect of the body, of the person, I beg your pardon, the personality. So I think I've put the baby there. Often the thing we're most afraid of is our vulnerability, is our dependency. And it's the undeveloped parts that may very much lie in our shadow, that we think ourselves we have to be kind of very proper and adult, but it's these sensitive infant parts that are very much need developing, perhaps. Traditional aspect of the shadow, things we're afraid of, perhaps aggression, murderousness, hatred, and I put something, not quite sure what this represents, but something kind of shadowy, maybe the spirituality, maybe other things that we haven't developed in our personalities. That's the shadow. So that's a kind of a very quick view. I mean, there are a lot more one could say about those, but I'm aware of time, and I want to just illustrate these with Jung's own dreams. So 2 more of Jung's own dreams. But a little bit of background about Jung, first of all. This is him aged 5. And a quote that I think very much sums up Jungian psychology: every experience of the self, the deeper self, is a defeat for the ego. So our ego is the way we see ourselves, it's what we're conscious of, and it's the way we feel we are. But it has to experience a defeat to be open the way to something new coming in, something from the self. So Jung, born 1875, he was the first surviving child. He had a brother, Paul, who'd survived for only 5 days. So his arrival was in a way heralded, but his mother was soon indifferent to the young Carl. She was a strange woman, and she kind of, having given birth to him, she took to her room, and he was more or less brought up by the maid for many years. His father, on the other hand, was a kindly, loving man. He nursed him when he was ill, moved into the same room for him for a while. And Carl's earliest experiences that he reported were kind of impersonal ones. The glorious beauty of the day, the blossom on a tree, spooning up milk and bread from his plate. So sort of the relational stuff didn't go so well for Jung early on, other than with his father. He was terrified of graves, funeral services, Jesuits, Jesus, and drowned bodies. He lived in this there was a massive waterfall right by him, and people would always be falling into the falls, and there was one body that was kept in an outhouse where he was, that he was completely fascinated by. So he was very much a man, a young boy of the kind of the wilds. His first dream actually was of a 12 to 15 foot phallus in an underground cave. I'm not going to go into that one, not for reasons of discretion, but I just don't think there'll be time. But I mention it in passing because it's important. We've already looked at this dream. Here was him, Jung on the right there, with Freud on the left. This was just before, this was when he was kind of at the heart of the psychoanalytic movement before he split from Freud. And part of that split, just after that split, he had this dream, the killing Siegfried dream. And Jung at that time was keeping a journal of his dreams and his thoughts in what's called the Red Book, which was published in 2009. I don't know if you've heard of it. Fascinating view into his most personal psychic life. And this was a painting he made of the dream in the Red Book. So in the dream, he and an unknown brown-skinned man, a savage, he says, lie in wait in a lonely rocky mountain landscape at dawn. They shot the magnificent, heroic Siegfried as he rounds the corner, driving at furious speed on his chariot made of the bones of the dead. Jung is anxious to avoid blame and is relieved when a tremendous downfall of rain wiped out all the traces of the dead, but an unbearable feeling of guilt remained. So that was his dream. So if we think about this on the various levels, so on the objective level, this came just after his split from Freud, and it's not too hard to think of Siegfried being Sigmund Freud. So he'd killed off the magnificent Sigmund, who was by this point making quite a name for himself in psychoanalysis. On the subjective level, this was the emergence of his own murderous shadow aspects, his killing off. He sort of, in a way, as I said earlier, he sort of killed off his father as well. But most importantly, taking it on the subjective level, for Jung, this is about killing off the idealism, the heroic idealism of the ego. This is the ego that wants to be in control. And for him, symbolically, it meant getting rid of that part of ourselves which tries to impose our will on the world in order to let the self through. We have to abandon the ego, for there are higher things than the ego's will, and to these we must bow. So basically it's about bowing to our own nature, and this dream for him really began to crystallize that. On the transference level, we've got killing off Sigmund, as I said, killing off his father and other authority figures. And the archetypal level, he felt this applied to all of us. And his book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he felt we'd all become too caught up with control, our will, the ego, wanting things to go a certain way. We've been caught up in the head, and we needed to be able to sacrifice that to some extent in the way that previously had happened through religion, in order to be able to get in touch with our deeper selves, our more chthonic personalities. So that was that dream, and on those various levels. I mean, one could unpack this a lot more. I'm afraid you're getting a very quick bite at it. This is Jung in his mature years in his garden, looking rather pleased with himself. And the last of his dreams that I want to come to is the Tree of Life dream. And this was, if you like, the fulfillment for him of his psychological understanding. So this dream was in 1927. It was in Liverpool. It was a dirty, sooty city. It was night and winter and dark and raining. He was with a number of Swiss companions, and they climbed from the harbour up the Alley of the Dead to the cliff-top city on the plateau, which reminded him of Basel. On a square there, with various quarters of the city arranged radially around the square, but in the centre was a round pool, and in the middle of this was a small island, while everything round about it was obscured by rain, fog, smoke, and dimly lit darkness. The little island blazed with sunlight. On it stood a single tree, a magnolia in a shower of reddish blossoms. It was as though the tree stood in the sunlight and was at the same time the source of the light. His companions commented on the abominable weather and did not see the tree. They expressed surprise that another Swiss had chosen to settle there, whilst Jung thought he knew very well why he had done so. So, Jung's association, the liver is that by which we are able to live. And this is why he was able to live at all. So for him at that time, he had introduced his companion Tony Wolff into the family. Wasn't going well, surprisingly. Not surprisingly, of course. And his wife threatened to leave him on 3 occasions. And he was, at one point, apparently had considered suicide. I recommend Deirdre Bair's excellent biography of Jung to you, which she was given unique access to the Jung archives and has a lot of important information. So that was the dark side of things. That was the objective level. But on the internal level, he saw that here the goal had been reached. One could not go beyond the centre. The centre is, for him, the self. And through this dream, I understood that the self is the principle and archetype of orientation and meaning. One could also say the liver pool, the organ which processes the blood from the stomach, breaking down, balancing and creating nutrients for the body to use, whilst getting rid of harmful substances. And there were some things that perhaps this dream says that Jung couldn't work through. He couldn't work through the difficult things. So if we look at the elements in the dream, there's the soot, the fog, the darkness, the rain. I would suggest I've written about this analysed Jung in my other book, Into the Darkest Places. This was his early experience of loss and sadness, the mist, and this is his everyday self. And this is what he's surrounded by. But actually through that, he's been able to come to his understanding of the self. So on the subjective level, it's the balance between the ego perspective, the everyday, the soot and the rain, and the self, which is the tree of life, which is the sort of things which enabled him to work so well. And on the archetypal level, this is the way we're all able to overcome these early experiences, the early depressive experiences, and find a source within us that enable us to work through these difficulties. And the objective level, this was it describes his journey up through the Alley of the Dead. So all his experiences of death and rebirth, his experiences of failure, loss, whether it's related to Freud and work, he actually gave up various posts in order to allow himself to go into the unconscious, experience those deaths and kind of find that source. That's a kind of real dash through some really significant dreams of Jung's. I hope that's made some sense. How are we doing for time? Yes, we're doing it. Okay. So, if you have questions, I hope you're okay to hold those to the end. But what I'd like to look at now is interpreting your own dreams. So, if you're ready to do that, are you with me so far? Okay. So, do you have a dream in mind? I hope you have a dream in mind. And if you might like to write it down or think about it or bear it in mind, but before we do that, I'd just like to quote from Jung. So difficult is it to understand a dream that for a long time I've made it a rule when someone tells me a dream and asks for my opinion to say, first of all to myself, I have no idea what this dream means. After that, I can begin to examine the dream. And it's really important for really quite a long time to say to yourself, I have no idea what this dream means. You know, you can't force meaning onto a dream. You have to wait for it to emerge from the dream. And your own dreams are particularly difficult to understand, of course, because you're so close to them and you can't see what's in your own shadow. It's sometimes much easier to be able to understand someone else's dream. So the first thing I would ask you to think about in relation to this dream is, oh yes, I think I've said these ones already. So the first thing we have to do is explore the dream before we can even think about beginning to interpret it. And so we have to ask for associations. And the mistake that everyone makes with dreams is just to jump in with your own views on the dream without asking the person themselves for their associations. So, if you can think about every element in your dream, you might like to write it down, but you single out the different elements there. You know, is it a dream about various people in the dream? Are they sort of, how do they figure? And if you can think about what you think about that person, or so if it's a particular person, so say I dreamt peculiarly of my old classmate, Jane Simmons, you might like to think to yourself, so what are Jane Simmons's qualities? And it turns out that she was perhaps a best friend who was always there for me when I needed her. She was someone who was warm and supportive. So you know, if you can go through the different elements in your dream, associating to those. And just to give a bit of background, it's important to think about where the dream is located. So, you know, are you in the dream in an exposed, dangerous place? How old are you in the dream? You know, is this you? Is it going back to something from your youth? Is it some young part of you that's got in touch with? And where is the dream in terms of, you know, is it at school? Is it at work dream? What place is it? So, can you sort of pick out the different elements in the dream and make your particular associations to them? And on the archetypal level, another element of the dream is, you know, the earth, air, fire and water. The earth is, this is the grounded place that you are. It's sort of the kind of the, so what sort of place are you in the dream? Are you in a sort of a dry desert like this? Are you climbing a rocky mountain like that? Dreams about air or flying, it's about ideas, thoughts, feelings. You're getting up into the air. Dreams about fire tend to be about passions, about things that you're being consumed by. And dreams about water, very much about emotional states. Are you kind of in the middle of the ocean? Is there a tidal wave coming? What are your emotions doing? Is it nice and calm? So those are those kind of archetypal elements of the dream. So are you able to sort of put those onto your dreams? Are there these kind of ideas beginning to fit? Can you kind of make those associations, thinking to yourself that you don't understand what this dream means, and you're going to hopefully make some various associations, the various elements in the dreams. It's very difficult for me without knowing all your dreams, I'm afraid, but if you can begin to sort of think what those elements are. And the second thing to do is look for the patterns. So what's going on in the dream? Who's doing what to whom? What's being symbolized overall here? What are the models? So if we think about Jung's dream, They'd made this journey and they'd found something at the end. So this was about his journey to find the self, the tree of life. So if you think about that in terms of your dream, what's the main drama? And how does this apply? And some other sort of archetypal symbols about things that go on in dream. So death. So people are often rather alarmed by death in dreams, but it might well be that something needs to die off. That part of yourself needs to die off. So, if you dreamt, say that your mother's died. So on the objective level, you think, well, have I missed something? Is she ill and I hadn't noticed? If your mother's still around. Or maybe there's some part of that relationship with mother that needs to die off. And often the most traumatic things for people are dreams where they're dying, but maybe that your old self needs to die off. So that's treating the death symbolically. Birth, something new coming into the world, a new part of yourself being born, often a really important thing, heralding something new coming. Marriage, two parts getting together, you with another person perhaps, you with someone that you wouldn't have thought likely, but perhaps what are they symbolizing? What are they symbolizing that you need perhaps to have in your personality? Sex, rather a wooden version I fear. Things coming together, some sort of impregnation, something being, some impact, some, coming together anyway. So sex can very much be related to a very creative coming together. And toilets. Unfortunately, as a Jungian, you might think I'm being given lots of wonderful dreams. The most frequent dreams, I'm told, are of people trying to find a toilet or trying to find, and they find a toilet, they find it's blocked, they find it's overflowing, they find it hasn't got walls or doors. These are the things, how do we deal with the shit of our lives, the difficult feelings, the anger, the urine, these are the things that we really struggle with. So if your dream happens to have that in, you're in good company with the rest of us. The other thing I'd ask you to think about in relation to your dream, what's the emotion in the dream? What's the feeling? Often that's a clue to the whole dream, really. It's that feeling state. But it may well be that the feeling isn't congruent with what you think. So I was told I had cancer, but I was pleased. Why would that be? And this also relates to the position of the self in the dream. So, are you the protagonist? Are you the person doing the dream? Are you the, for example, angry one, or are you being attacked? Oh. Are you the attacker or the attacked? Are you kind of the subject of the dream looking out, or are you looking down on something that's happening? Often people dream of a film, so there's something going on that you can't be directly involved with, and so, but maybe need to be more involved with to recognise these dynamics. Are you asleep in the dream? Someone dreamt of hearing a voice saying, "Wake up, wake up." What did they need to wake up from? Are you drunk in the dream? In what way are you not in touch with reality? Or are you on stage? Are you feeling really exposed? So this is the different ways that the I can be. And it's also important to think, when did you have the dream? And the dream will apply primarily at that time. It'll be trying to tell you something about what's going on at that moment. And it's a compensation, it's a message to balance your conscious position at that time. Yet it may also, on other levels, highlight something ongoing. It may be, hopefully it will reach down and illuminate something about your internal working models, something about the way some pattern from your early life that it can tell you about in the way nothing else can. And then finally, where and on what levels does this dream apply? So And hopefully you've got the idea by now of these different levels, the objective level, where and this is just what I put before, where the image corresponds to object in the real world, the subjective level, the transference level, the relational level, and the archetypal level. So, and hopefully as we've sort of gone through these, beginning of feeling about your dream might emerge if you've got one, and I hope you're doing some of that. And you might begin to apply it, but it sort of, don't worry if the meaning doesn't come immediately. It may well come later, and when I'm working on a dream, you very much want to involve the other person in therapy, and it's a job for two people really. Okay. I think that's probably all I want to fire at you, and I'm probably ready to stop and think about anything you want to say, either about that process of that dream interpretation or anything else from earlier. Yeah, question at the back. What's my understanding of the integrated state? Hypnagogic state. Oh, yeah, there's those dreams where you have when you are just waking up in the morning, and well, it's a bit like that sleep onset dream that I mentioned, but that when you say hypnagogic state, are you sort of talking about? Surely that's one for Charlie this afternoon, isn't it? But I mean, I guess the thing about, I don't think this properly directly impacts on on your thought, but we're actually supposed to forget dreams. If we're remembering a dream, it's some extra work that we need to do. All this stuff goes on all the time in our unconsciouses, and the purpose of dreaming is to process it and to forget it. But if we are left with a dream and it carries on into the day, a particular mood, it's something that we haven't been able to process, and therefore it comes into consciousness, and it's an opportunity to do some work on it. It's half an answer.
I read something recently, I think, and it basically said, another supposed expert on sleep, it just said, anybody who tells you they can nail down the meaning of a dream, there's no sort of clear science behind it, clear evidence that that's sort of like you can nail down the interpretation of a dream. Now, personally, I found dream work useful, but whether the interpretations are real or just, I make it up and it has some use, I don't know.
So the question is, in case you didn't hear it, anyone who says they can nail down the meaning of a dream is kind of perhaps a bit deluded, but is it useful? It can be useful, yeah? Or not. But yeah, and the gentleman's found it useful. I mean, I hope what I've said is clear, that you can't nail down a meaning of a dream, and that actually it's got many different meanings and layers and levels of meanings. I've read something in a paper the other day about, there's a book out at the moment by an American woman who had looked at very few dreams and said, if you dream of that, it means that. And I think that's going back to that view of the ancients of, fixed symbols. And I think that you're on really dodgy ground with that kind of dream interpretation. But just working with dreams and over the years, you just get to know that they're just trying to tell you something. I mean, I guess I know that's a subjective statement, but it's just so clear that something that you've been struggling with someone over many years, perhaps, or weeks or months, the dream will capture it, and it's so helpful. Thank you.
Just going on from what you just said, I like to give an example to my clients about dreams that, let's say one dreams about spiders.
Right.
And
dream about spiders.
Depends what your relationship with spiders is like. I mean, I did once have a dream. I had a very nurturing dream to do with spiders. They were actually suckling their young, and I looked at it with my therapist actually when I was still a trainee. And it was a very positive, nurturing dream. But see, I'm fine with handling spiders, but if someone has fear of spiders. If they dream of spiders, it's like to mean something quite different, and that did happen with a client of mine who had a dream that involved spiders, and he was scared of spiders, so it had a completely different sort of meaning for him. So I like to use that as an example.
Yeah, it's a very nice example. So in case you didn't hear, a dream of spiders, this gentleman's dreamt of spiders and has a really nice relationship with spiders, whereas his patient is terrified, frightened of spiders. I think really underlines the important thing is the first thing to ask is the person's particular associations. So all that I was saying about the archetypal associations back there, really, if someone has got a particular personal association to something, that trumps it. So, you know, someone might dream about a dog and you think, oh great, we're onto sort of something about fidelity and friendliness and personality, or is it a black dog, is it about depression, something follows you around? But actually, first question, what's your association to dogs, to this particular dog? You know, maybe the person was bitten by dogs, maybe they hate dogs, you know, that's where you've got to start. Thank you.
I'm curious if you could speak to the idea of dreaming as a healing process. So if a person has, I don't know if we would call it disordered dreaming, but they dream excessively or they have repetitive traumatic dreams, etc., or they wake up with nightmares, is it necessary for those dreams to be worked out in the conscious mind for there to be healing happening, or can one feel those things at a subconscious level without having to make them apparent? You know what I mean?
Okay. So, question about the healing nature of dreams, and particularly repetitive dreams. Can they be worked out unconsciously, or do they have to be brought into the conscious mind? So, even Freud recognized that one type of dream that didn't fit in with his wish fulfillment theory were dreams that were traumatic, and he recognized that people who suffered trauma had these repetition compulsion. Dreams just go over and over the traumatic events. And this is the psyche trying to work through the trauma. Each time you go through it, horrific though it is, the psyche is hoping for mastery. However, if you're just going around it again and again, it's probably a sign that the psyche is saying help. And you almost certainly do need to be working with it on the conscious level, precisely because it's drawing your attention to something that's so massive that you're dreaming about it all the time. So whilst the psyche can do quite a lot unconsciously, I think there are times when we need to recognize that and get help with it. I mean, personally, I'm also working with trauma. I'm trained in EMDR, so sort of you can work with those traumatic experiences very effectively with EMDR as well as with therapy, but as an adjunct, where you're really getting to the affective, the emotional core of the traumatic event.
If people don't remember the dreams, for example, like if you're working with PTSD patients who know that they wake up with nightmares, but they don't remember the content of those dreams, can one still work with it that way?
It's amazing what can come back. I mean, the simplest thing to say to someone is say to yourself, I want to remember my dream in the morning. And then if you can easily, hopefully train yourself to do so. Some people do really struggle with that, but if the person's remembered something, if they've remember they've woken up in a bad state, so what feeling state have they been left with? I mean, people who've had a difficult childhood often will wake up in a depressed state, and it might be way into the day before hopefully they're able to get out of it. So you're working with that affective state that often clings after waking. So your conscious mind is able to sort of get out of that, but what happens at night is that all the rest, the stuff that you haven't yet digested, comes back to you in the shape of your dreams and the feelings. So often that's what you're waking up into. So that's the bit that you need to address. Yeah, there first. Okay. EMDR, it was Francine Shapiro was a psychologist. She went for a walk in the 1990s, really worried about something, and she realized that at the end of her walk she felt better. And she did a lot of thinking about this, and what she realized was that actually when you're walking, you're stimulating the different sides of your brain. So what you do with EMDR simply is that you ask a person to focus on their trauma, and then it might sound rather ridiculous, but you do this with your hand, and you ask them to follow it with their eyes. And then, so you do this for 20 or 30 passes, and they follow it while they're thinking about the traumatic event, and then you say, well, what's come to you? And then it's really very psychoanalytic, because what they're doing is they are free associating, and they are working through and working on the traumatic feeling, and the traumatic feeling then slowly lowers. So often, if you come up, say, you start with a simple one like a fear of spiders, you can start with someone who's, you ask, how distressed are you about this fear of spiders? Say, 8 out of 10, I really can't stand it. And, after a number of sessions of EMDR, maybe they're down to a sort of level of 2 distressed, because what happens is your level comes down and you're working through the traumatic complex. So it stands for eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing. So you're reprocessing the trauma through desensitization and through eye movements. Lady behind you, yeah.
Do we know what makes people remember or forget their dreams? Do we know why some people never remember them?
There are apparently, other than those who've got their brain, had the brain injuries that I described, there are some people who don't have dreams, and they're people who've there's something about that. We need a certain part of the brain to form images, but they're very rare. Mostly, we just forget dreams because we're supposed to forget dreams, because, well, like I was just explaining a few moments ago. But why? I think most people will find that at certain periods of their life, they will remember more dreams than others. Particularly when we're going through a very difficult time, then our dream life will be fuller because our unconscious is busy working away, trying to work out stuff, trying to process it. But there are some people who remember few dreams, and there, people have different kinds of dreams. So, if you like, rule of thumb for me, someone who's had a really traumatic time will often, their dreams will be less detailed, and it'll be more about an emotional thing. So, as we were saying here, you'll be waking up into difficult emotions. Whereas someone who sort of is more cognitively based, they'll have these rich kind of odd little nuggets of dreams where all this weird stuff is going on that you can unpack in a very kind of interesting cognitive way. But the essence really is still the affective stuff that the unconscious is trying to process. But we each do it to our own particular personality. Yeah, thank you.
Can we tell the difference between recalling a dream and recalling a memory? Because sometimes, in that state before you go into deep sleep, something may come to the fore. And I'm just wondering, do we know when it's a dream or when it might be a memory or a traumatic memory?
So the question, in case you didn't hear it, when do we know that what we're remembering, what we're recalling is a dream or a memory? I mean, of course, dreaming is about the reprocessing of memories. So in a way, I think it was Freud who thought that actually about a week after something had happened, then we might start dreaming about it, because then it would start being processed. But in a way, there's always going to be an element of memory in there, because that's the stuff of our lives. It's the stuff that's been happening to us. But I'm not. But does that answer your question? Or are you saying, is it a memory? How do we? If we dream of something, does it mean we're actually just remembering it? Is it?
Yeah, I guess somebody who's been through trauma may find that on different occasions something kind of comes up just before they're in deep sleep.
Yeah. Well, and often that is precisely the time, is when the conscious ego is sort of gone, sort of letting go, and then stuff can come to you that is otherwise held out of consciousness. And often, you'll have to also ask why that time. Maybe the person is finally feeling safe enough or something. Often people feel okay, and then they get in a new relationship, or they get married, or they go into therapy, and they suddenly, all this stuff comes back, and they think, well, why? I'm happier, I've never been so happy in my life. It's because they're safe enough, and their psyche thinks, all right, you can deal with this shit now, here it comes. Gentleman over there.
Kind of related, how much do you think you kind of add memories to a dream after the fact? You kind of abstract dream and then you add details that weren't really in the dream, you kind valid afterwards. So like Jung, some of his dreams seem very detailed. How much do you think he added kind of extra details after?
Yeah. So question in case you didn't hear it, how much detail do we add to dreams after we've had them? And Freud thought he called this secondary revision, and he thought they added a lot. And for Freud's way of interpreting dream was he was more interested with where we went after the dream than the dream itself. Jung kind of treated the dream in a really sacred way and went back to what's the dream trying to tell us, but Freud was very much aware of this secondary revision where things get changed, and they do get changed. In a way, you're still working with what the psyche is doing to them. If you're changing them, why are you changing them and why are you elaborating them? But I think if you kind of train yourself to write down dreams and remember them, actually you're getting pretty close to what actually happened in the dream. Often in the retelling of it, you'll find that you'll forget certain bits, or maybe it'll get a bit elaborated. And Jung told that house dream a number of times, and actually it did start to change over time. So, the psyche does weird stuff, but hey, that's what it's all about. So, gentleman here first, thank you.
Do you have any comments on the relationship between psychosis and especially prophetic dreams in Jungian psychology?
The reason they gave a whole lot of money to dream research laboratories in the 60s, 70s, 80s was they thought that dreams would have the answer to psychosis. And clearly what happens in psychosis is the ego isn't functioning as well, and that you're operating in this kind of primary process way, as Freud would call it, where you're making lots of associations and you're not able to process them, so you feel terribly exposed. I'm generalizing about psychosis a great deal there because there are lots of different types, but so you're entering that kind of that state which is the way the unconscious works, where there isn't that organizing ego functioning effectively, which is vital. And when it's taken over by these various traumatic complexes, the person might be thought to be in a psychotic state. But that's a very rough answer to your question. Lady behind you.
Can you develop through time an ability to build up fixed narratives, kind of storytelling through your dreams, and so in a way not to trick your brain, but in a way that you maybe have different dreams, of course, according to your life, the phases of your life, but it's always a very subjective reading, as if you're building yourself or an understanding, so you're leading your dream.
So the question, if I've got you rightly, is can you build up the kind of a narrative related to your dreams whereby you're kind of developing yourself through the dreams? And you mean taking it back into the dream as well, or not?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. If you can trick your brain and take distance from and you're aware your dreams are telling you something, but you can also kind of build up your personality, or always the same kind of...
Can you build up your personality in that way? So on the one hand, surely a question for Charlie Morley at the end of the day, because he works that, but I think really dreams are central, I mean, particularly if you're not in therapy or you've been in therapy, central to the way of understanding yourself and taking you deeper in. And they will change over time, so you do build up a narrative. And Jung was particularly interested in series of dreams, so that, the dream, how it develops over time. And very much it's a matter of working on those things and developing certain aspects and seeing how it's changing, and the dreams kind of confirm it and point you in the next direction a bit more, and much easier to do if you're working with someone on them, but even if you've left therapy, then your dreams are the way that continually tie you back into yourself and remind you when you're going astray.
How does this change when things like psychoactive substances are involved? So you have people do like IoT or whatever. Is that unlocking, just a different part of your brain that you're not able to access normally, or is it just simply drawing up random things in your brain?
So question about what different psychoactive substances are having a dream. Well, I mean, they are surely doing that issue of knocking out the ego in some way and putting you in touch with this, the unconscious's way of making these links. So it feels, you know, you're having sort of, you know, sort of many different types of psychoactive substance, but so you might be able to feel, if you're having a blissful trip, you know, you're feeling in touch with the universe. So that sameness recognizing aspect of the unconscious, so that you're feeling at one with things, so that you can feel, you know, life in a stone, or you can feel, you know, life everywhere. That's on a good day. You know, so surely those substances will enhance those kind of things and have those kind of effects. But how that affects the dreams, or how, you know, if you like, you might ask, well, why are you needing to fiddle with your psyche in that way? But it's just
I just mean, when people have done this and they have these dreams or whatever, is it they've unlocked something particular, or is it just random?
Yeah, I think so. I think people are trying to get out of that fixed ego. They're feeling stuck with themselves, aren't they? And you know, I think often they will use drugs to do that. You know, all kind of forms of self-medication like that. Meditation, of course, is probably the best way of getting you in touch with your unconscious, which is a bit less psycho-poisonous. But gentleman here.
This is in relation to the last question. What are your thoughts on chemistry of dreams, endogenous DMT in particular? Do you have any thoughts?
Just gone beyond my level of knowledge, I'm afraid. Don't know much about chemistry of brain. I mean, other than, I don't want to push myself beyond what I know, so can't be much help, I'm afraid. Gentleman here. Yeah.
What did you think about lucid dreaming, where you become actively aware of dreaming and have autonomy over what happens?
Again, one for Charlie, but yes, of course, what did Jung think about it? I'm not sure. He's written a lot on dreams. I don't remember reading anything about it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. He's got 22 volumes of complete works that stretch this long on my shelf, and I haven't read everything. Again, oh dear, we're reaching the end of my knowledge base, I'm afraid. I don't know. Gentleman at the back.
In relation to dreaming, what part does the pineal gland play?
I missed that, I'm afraid. What part is? The pineal gland, does it play a part in dreaming? I don't know if it specifically does. They used to think that the pineal gland was the center of the personality, where it joined your consciousness to your body, didn't they? Again, you're beyond my pay grade. Do you know anything about that yourself? Yeah, sorry not to be much more help. Gentleman here.
I've been a qualified therapist for some time. I've never had a patient, a client, come to me talking about dreams. Am I doing something wrong?
Are you a Jungian?
No, person centered.
They've never mentioned a dream. Goodness. Well, I mean, maybe you've kind of put the word Jungian on your door, and people come with dreams. Some people kind of say in the first session, "Have you had any dreams?" I don't, but gosh, that's weird. I wonder if you will now, having been here, whether you'll put out your vibes and something will happen. Gentleman here, and then lady. It's relaxing, yeah. Consciousness is, we're not locking it out, but, so the question was, are we locking out the ego when we're dreaming? What does happen when we're dreaming? So the body is related to the ego is related to the body, and actually we are knocking out the body to some extent, because we don't move, and we go on a psychic journey. So quite a few things about our ordinary consciousness are knocked out, and so we're making all those connections, which is part of that processing that goes on to process the memories and things and see how they relate to our past experience or our feelings about ourselves or our relationships. So that's what's going on in that process. Who was some? Oh yes, lady here.
Talk a little bit about Jung's idea of the analogies with integration of the psyche and religious ideas of enlightenment, like the philosophy of Abraham or mystical and spiritual experience.
Right. So the question was, could I say a bit about Jung's idea about the integration of the psyche and religious ideas and enlightenment? For Jung, so his primary idea is that we get too centered in our egos and our wish to control, which has a limited focus, and that actually we have to relinquish that to be in touch with what he calls the self. So, and this is a radical thing. This is not, this is about, he says, we have to bow down to the self. We have to become subject to the self, which means giving up that whole view, which is essentially a religious process. His aim was to understand what the religions had taught and and he himself had experienced, and to talk about that in psychological terms. So for him, the self, it's a peculiar word because it sounds like you're talking about yourself, but you're not. The self is always other than you, and the self for him is God. So what people have called God in religions, or if Buddhist, there isn't God in a Buddhist religion, say, but that's a sense of what you're listening to. It's essentially a religious process, as it were, or what has been thought of in terms of a religious process. So you're tuning into those forces which are beyond the eye. It's not about the eye; it's what's beyond the eye. Okay, lady there.
Can you say more about the defeat of the ego? That's what you said.
Yeah. Well, he thought that, in a way, it's the thing we're always struggling with. We're kind of struggling in our lives to make things happen, to go well or whatever. And in a way, if we do that, we can just get stuck with the ego. So the defeat of the ego, it may be as simple as things like a feeling of failure or a feeling of I don't know what to do. Prayer is precisely saying, something larger than me, I don't know what's going on here. You're turning to something else. You're opening yourself up to being informed by the self. So you're saying my ego has reached its limits. I don't know what to do. I don't know. I can't manage it. Well,
I've done many studies about confirmation bias in this area. I'm the kind of person that will want to go to a therapist and talk about my dreams. Am I not more likely to want to follow what I'm told or look out for confirmation of what I'm told by the therapist? Is that not effective?
Yes, probably that's right. I don't know much about this area either. But yes. The one thing that did kind of worry me slightly, say what you're told. I mean, hopefully, you're working together with your therapist on something. It has to feel right to you. I mean, Jung said something. I'm going to misquote him, but something like only the truth works. You can sit there as a therapist and tell someone all kinds of stuff, and actually, if it doesn't fit with their personality, it's not going to work. So you might have confirmation bias because you want to believe something, but and of course there is a sort of relational benefit from being with someone else, being able to discuss things, being able to be yourself. You could call that a kind of placebo effect, but actually that's the relational heart of the process. Yeah, and if you're the sort of person who goes and is prepared to put yourself into that, then yeah, maybe you will benefit in that way. Lady, this lady here.
I would like to know if he saw dreams as a combination of probabilities, but did he ever claim dreams could be essentially prophetic, and how did he explain it?
So, question: can dreams be essentially prophetic? Well, like I said, he I think he didn't want to say they could be, but he saw it as like a medical diagnosis or or like a weather forecast, where we're picking up all this stuff all the time. So you could say that the Pharaohs dream of the fat cows and the thin cows. It's like he had a purview of the whole of his kingdom. And so he would be resonating with those things and would be thinking about it. And so that's part of Jung. That was part of Jung's answer. Jung also had a further view about synchronicity. I don't want to talk about synchronicity because I'm not a particular expert, but it's like there is a sense that we can know things in a different kind of way. So I think he might have been inclined to think that sometimes we could know things. I mean, so for example, a patient of his apparently shot themselves, and he woke with a painful feeling in the back of his head at precisely that moment. How did that happen? And those kind of things can happen. So, that on that level of communication, that level of knowing about other things that we apparently didn't know, and there are some people who are very good at that, are much more in tune with those kind of things. Now, how that works, I don't know, but so I hope that responded enough. Yes, lady.
Yeah, can you develop a specific set of skills through dreaming, for instance, like self-awareness, imagination, analysis, and can you touch that activity and like seeing it as a science in itself? So, yeah.
So can you develop a certain set of skills? Yeah, certainly. The most important one being open and listening. And being open to. I mean, I don't know how far you got with my little example of trying to talk you through a dream, but, hopefully if you can just listen to those things, see what comes to you. Don't try and force it from your ego. If you're open to those things, that's kind of the best way to learn and to follow those things. Lady here.
You were interested that my friend hadn't had anybody come to them with their dreams. I have occasionally, but what I don't generally do, and I'm interested in what you do, is ask somebody about a dream unless they have brought dreaming up. I mean, it might be dreams, we might start talking about sleep and it might move into, but it wouldn't be something that, generally speaking, I think, let's find out about their dreams. Is that part of how you work or not?
I'm pretty strict in that I don't ask people about their dreams either. I think you're distorting it. Maybe they don't want to talk about their dreams, or maybe they think, they're interested in dreams, so I'll please him by bringing him a dream. And then all kinds of distortions come in.
So it's not a focus of your work?
It's an interest I have. Heavens knows whether people who come to see me know I've got an interest in it, and therefore bring them, or whether they're interested. And so, like you were saying about, people who come because they know what you're interested in. But I don't ask is the straight answer, but I'm certainly interested. And usually what happens is that because I'm interested, or because when they bring a dream, something happens and we get something out of it, they might well then bring another dream. Anyway, lady here.
Can you say something about Jung's ideas about dreaming, particularly in relation to the creative process, specifically maybe the process of creating art?
Okay, this will probably have to be the last question because we're ending in now, more or less. So, dreams and the creative process. Just finishing now. Well, specifically about art. Jung had a whole lot about art because, the Red Book is full of stuff about his artistic work. He drew his dreams, he painted his dreams. The artistic process is surely about being open to the unconscious. People who paint and write books, they often feel they didn't do it, that they've opened themselves up. So, which is very much about the process of listening to the self and listening to dreams and being open to the unconscious. And I hope that's a good point to end. Thank you very much.